Hello and welcome to Traditional Painting the Digital Way. This is where I use digital painting apps to teach traditional painting techniques. In this video, we're going to be starting a brand new series, and one of my subscribers requested that we try to do something in charcoal. So I thought that I would do this cute little teddy bear picture in charcoal. Here's a list of all the supplies that I use when working traditionally with charcoal. I use charcoal pencils, and there's also a white charcoal. I use a cloth, a big eraser, eraser sticks, charcoal sticks, pencil sharpener, and I also use Arches watercolor paper. And you can either use Arches cold press watercolor paper or Arches cover paper. I prefer Arches cover paper for my charcoal because it's a little bit softer and it's not quite as rough. But the technique that I use when working traditionally with charcoal demands that we have a pretty thick paper. So we're going to be using Infinite Painter for Android, and I want to select sort of a watercolor texture paper as well for this. And I like Infinite Painter because you can pick the texture that you want, and then all the brushes will react accordingly to the texture that you've picked. And so I've picked kind of a cold press watercolor look. And I'm using the Curt brush to go ahead and just cover the whole paper. And you want to go ahead and cover it and make it black. And you can do this traditionally as well. Just take your big charcoal sticks and go over the whole paper and then smudge it with your cloth rag. And so the way that I use charcoal is I work subtractively. That means I cover the whole paper with charcoal and then I erase out my shapes. And so what I'm doing here is I'm erasing out the shape of the teddy bear, and this is how I'm drawing it. Instead of drawing it with a pencil or something and adding the charcoal, I'm erasing it out. And that's why you need a thick paper for this sort of charcoal technique. You want a big, thick watercolor type paper because we're going to do a lot of erasing. And so I'm just using either the Curt or the Julienne brush, or I guess they're pencils really. I'll just call them pencils for the purposes of this video, the Julienne pencil and the Curt pencil. And I'm just taking the eraser set on one of those pencils and erasing out the design. And then here I'm kind of smudging it back in because I didn't like the way I did it right. And this is how you erase when you're doing charcoal subtractively, is you just kind of take your rag and wipe over it, or you take your smudge tool and just go back over it. And then take your eraser and draw it in again. And so I've got a pretty good shape outline that I like here. And I got this picture from Pixabay, which has royalty-free reference photos. And then I just turned it into black and white. Now when I was in college, in my art class, we had a still life set up, and we just had to figure out the different shades, and we didn't get to do this little shortcut where you can take a photograph and then turn it into black and white, which is actually really good practice, and you might want to try that just to figure out how shades are and how your highlights are and translate them into a black and white photo. But here I just went ahead and did a shortcut. So I'm doing the background here just a little bit, and we don't want anything really big or detailed. We just kind of want an indistinct looking background, like there's some distant bushes or grass behind him. And then later on we'll work on the foreground and we'll make the grass look more detailed. But for now we just kind of want to smudge in a little bit of some grass shapes, and you can use the Curt or the Julienne brush on that and just kind of erase it out. And if you're following along traditionally, you would use your big eraser if you wanted to, or you could use your eraser stick, but the big eraser would probably work the quickest. And then here I'm just kind of erasing out the inside of the bear, and I'm doing it with really jagged strokes just to kind of give a fur texture. And of course we'll go back over that and work on it. And then here I just kind of wanted to give my paper a little bit of a tint, because Arch's cover paper kind of has an off-white color. It's not a real bright white, and so that just kind of gives you a little bit more realistic look here if you go ahead and tint your paper in Infinite Painter as well. And then I'm just erasing out more details on the bear right here and kind of refining the edges and the shapes. And then if you want to start working with some detail, I pick the Blackwell pencil. And you just can kind of work around on the shape of the feet and erase those out using the Blackwell selection. And you can put that selection also on your smudge tool in Infinite Painter. And the smudge tool in Infinite Painter is comparable to using a blending stump. And so that's what I'm doing here, is smoothing out the strokes on his belly by using the smudge tool set on Blackwell. And that just kind of gives it the look of using a blending stump traditionally. And then here I'm doing some more erasing, and I'm just kind of trying to get a little bit of a fur-like texture. So I'm doing crisscross lines sort of to try to get the look of his fur there, and then smudging it back in because you don't want any big hard lines at this point. And you just kind of want to go ahead and work on the edges of the painting, work on the shape here, and erasing out all the charcoal. And you want the texture of the paper below, if you're working traditionally, to show through. And that's why I like Infinite Painter, because that gives it this effect, that effect. It looks like there's paper and you can see the texture showing through underneath when you erase. And you can probably get this effect also with Corel Painter, but it's a little bit more complicated to do that with Corel Painter, but it does have textures and papers and brushes that will follow along with the texture. And then here I'm just kind of working on his bandana and trying to get it erased out a little bit and then smudged in. And you would just kind of blend the charcoal with your blending stump and maybe your rag or a finger. And just kind of working on the edges of it and trying to do the folds. I'm trying to show the folds of his bandana here. And you go ahead and lay down a line with your pencil and then you smudge it. And that's how you do this whole entire picture. You erase, you smudge, you lay some lines down, you blend them. You go back and erase out again, and you just keep on doing that and getting more and more refined. And so here I overexposed the photo that I had because I wanted to see the details on the flower that the bear is holding. So I went ahead and worked on that photo in another program. I think it was Aviary. And just overexposed it so that I can see the details of the flower that he's holding here. And so I'm just taking a charcoal pencil and my eraser sticks. At this point, when you want to do fine detail with your eraser, use your eraser sticks that have a sharper point. Some people use a kneaded eraser, but I want something that's more like a pencil, so I use my eraser sticks. And you can get the Tough eraser from dickblick.com, and it has really thin erasers in it, and so you can actually get some detail with that, or use what they used to call typewriter erasers. They have a different name for them now because people just use them for their artwork instead of typewriters. And anyway, so I'm using those kind of erasers here to put the detail on his face here and around on the flower, and you just kind of erase out with sort of crisscross lines and jagged lines. And then you can kind of lower the opacity on the Julian pencil or the Kurt pencil and it still leaves charcoal down below, and that gives you the same effect that you would get traditionally if you don't use your full force with the eraser. It leaves kind of a texture on the paper, and that's what it's doing here in Infinite Painter. And then I'm just adding the eyes to the bear's face and the nose and refining all that a little bit. And you can use a charcoal pencil, use the black oil pencil in Infinite Painter, and just keep making little refinements there, but don't make the lines real thick or dark. You want these lines to be rough because we're trying to make a soft edge here. And I'm doing the same thing on the ears. I'm smudging the black lines, making them look smoother and softer. And that's just the technique that I use with this charcoal. We're making it look more like a painting because we want soft edges and we don't want any hard lines. And so we just kind of want to keep it looking like a painting. I mean, it's kind of almost like charcoal painting instead of drawing, the way that I work with charcoal. And you just kind of go around and find places here. I'm working on the muzzle. I'm adding a little bit of some of the dark back to make the shadows in his ears and on his muzzle, under his arms here. But I'm using the pencil on half opacity here, so it's kind of not making it real dark look. And that just kind of gives it the fur texture that you want. And then I'm using the black oil pencil to further refine the muzzle here, and just kind of working on his nose. And you set the smudge tool to black oil pencil too, because that will give it the look of a blending stomp. And that's what I'm doing, just kind of blending around on his face here, just trying to make it have that fur texture. You don't want to blend everything out. You want it to be kind of rough. And then I'm working a little bit on the edge of the flowers as well. And so this is the end of part 1 of my teddy bear and charcoal series. And in part 2, we're going to add further refinements to the bear. And we're going to go ahead and work a little bit more on the flower in his hand. So if you want to see part 2, hit that subscribe button. Thanks everybody for watching. Thank you so much for your support. If you have any questions, just leave them in the comments down below, and I will catch you later.